But that in demons there is a sin of the will is manifest from the authority of the Holy Scriptures. For it is said in 1 John 3:3 that the devil sins from the beginning, and John 8:44, it is said of the devil that he is a liar and the father of lies, and that he was a murderer from the beginning. And Wisdom 2:24, it is said that through the envy of the devil, death entered the world. But if one wished to follow the positions of the Platonists, there would be an easy way to solve the aforesaid. For they say that demons are animals with an airy body, and thus, when they have bodies united to themselves, there may also be a sensitive part in them. Hence they also attribute to them the passions which are the cause of our sin, namely anger, hatred, and the like, for which reason Apuleius says that they are passive in the mind. In addition to the fact that they are held to be united bodies, according to the positions of Plato, it might be possible to place in them a different kind of knowledge than the intellect. For according to Plato, even the sensitive soul is incorruptible. Hence it must have an operation with which the body does not communicate. And thus nothing prevents the operation of the sensitive soul from being found in some intellectual substance, although it is not united to the body and consequently the passions. And so the same root of sin remains in them that is in us. But both of these premises are impossible, for it has been shown above that there are no other intellectual substances united to bodies than human souls. Now that the operations of the sensitive soul cannot exist without the body, it appears from this that, when some organ of feeling is corrupted, the operation of one sense is corrupted, just as, with a corrupted eye, vision fails. Because of this, when touched by a corrupt organ, without which an animal cannot exist, the animal must die. For the evidence of the foregoing doubt, we must consider that, just as there is an order in active causes, so also in final causes, namely that the secondary end depends on the principle, just as the secondary agent depends on the principle. But sin occurs in the causes of agents when the secondary agent departs from the order of the principal agent, as when the pipe fails because of its curvature from the execution of the movement which the appetitive power commanded, lameness follows. So therefore, also in final causes, when the secondary end is not contained under the order of the principal end, it is a sin of the will, the object of which is good and end. But every will naturally wills that which is the proper good of the willing, that is to say, to be perfect, and cannot will the opposite of this. In that willing person, then, no sin can happen to the will, whose proper good is the last end, because it is not contained under the order of another end, but under its order all other ends are contained. But God is willing in this way, whose being is the highest goodness, which is the ultimate end. In God, then, there can be no sin of the will, but in any other willing person, whose own good must necessarily be contained under the order of another good, sin can happen to the will, if it is considered in its own nature. For although there is a natural inclination of the will in every willing person to will and love his own perfection, so that he cannot will the opposite of this, however, it is not so naturally given to him that he should so order his perfection to another end that he cannot fail from it, since the higher end is not proper to his own nature, but to a superior nature. It is therefore left to his discretion to order his own perfection to a higher end. For in this, those who have will differ from those who lack will, because those who have will direct themselves and their own toward an end, whence they are said to be free wills. but those who lack will do not direct themselves toward an end. There could therefore be a sin in the will of a separate substance from the fact that it did not direct its own good and perfection to the ultimate end, but clung to its own good as an end. And since it is necessary from the end that the rules of action are taken, it follows that from himself, in which he established the end, he arranged for other things to be regulated, and that his will was not regulated by another superior. But this is due to God alone, and according to this it is to be understood that he desired the equality of God, not indeed that his own good might be equal to the divine good, for this could not fall into the understanding, and by desiring this he would desire that he were not, since the distinction of species proceeds according to different degrees of things, as appears from what has been said above. But to wish to regulate others, and not to have one's own will regulated by a superior, is to wish to be in charge, and in a certain way not to be subject, which is the sin of pride. Hence it is fittingly said that the first sin of the devil was pride. But because from one error about the principle various and multiple errors result, from the first disorder of the will which was in the devil, a multiple sin resulted in his will, and hatred towards God, as resisting his pride and punishing his guilt most justly, and envy to man, and many other such things. It is also to be considered that since the proper good of a person has an order to several superiors, he is free to withdraw from the order of any superior, and not to abandon the order of another, whether superior or inferior, to arrange his own for the good of the leader, and not of the king, or vice versa. But if the general withdraws from the king's order, the will of the soldier who withdraws from the will of the general and directs his will to the king will be good, but the bad will of the soldier who follows the will of the general against the will of the king. For the lower order of principle depends on the higher order. Now separate substances are not only ordered under God, but one of them is also ordered under another, from the first to the last, as was shown in the second. And since there can be sin of the will in anyone who wills under God, if considered in their nature, it was possible that some of the superiors, or even the highest among all, should sin according to their will. And this indeed is quite probable, for he would not have rested in his good as in the end, unless his good had been very perfect. It could therefore happen that some of the inferiors, by their own will, directed their own good into it, withdrawing from the divine order, which likewise sinned. But others, observing the divine order in the movement of their will, rightly withdrew from the order of the sinner, although of the superior according to the order of nature. But how in goodness or malice the will of both continues immovably will be shown in the fourth, for this pertains to the punishments or rewards of good or evil. And this indeed is quite probable, for he would not have rested in his good as in the end, unless his good had been very perfect. It could therefore happen that some of the inferiors, by their own will, directed their own good into it, withdrawing from the divine order, which likewise sinned. But others, observing the divine order in the movement of their will, rightly withdrew from the sinful order, although superior according to the order of nature. But how the will of both of them perseveres immovably in goodness or malice will be shown in the fourth, for this pertains to the punishments or rewards of good or evil. And this indeed is quite probable, for he would not have rested in his good as in the end, unless his good had been very perfect. It could therefore happen that some of the inferiors, by their own will, directed their own good into it, withdrawing from the divine order, which likewise sinned. But others, observing the divine order in the movement of their will, rightly withdrew from the order of the sinner, although of the superior, according to the order of nature. But how in goodness or malice the will of both continues immovably will be shown in the fourth. For this pertains to the punishments or rewards of good or evil, which likewise sinned. But others, observing the divine order in the movement of their will, rightly departed from the order of the sinner, although superior according to the order of nature. But how the will of both of them perseveres immovably in goodness or malice will be shown in the fourth. For this pertains to the punishments or rewards of good or evil, which likewise sinned. But others, observing the divine order in the movement of their will, rightly departed from the order of the sinner, although superior according to the order of nature. But how in goodness or malice the will of both continues immovably will be shown in the fourth. For this pertains to the punishments or rewards of good or evil. Now this differs between man and a separate substance, because in one man there are several appetitive virtues, one of which is ordered under the other. This indeed does not happen in separate substances, yet one of them is under the other. But sin occurs in the will in whatever way the lower appetite is deflected. Just as therefore, sin in separate substances would be either through the fact that it was deflected from the divine order, or through the fact that some of the lower ones were deflected from the order of something superior, remaining under the divine order. Thus sin occurs in one man in two ways. In one way, by the fact that the human will does not ordain its own good towards God, which sin indeed is common both to itself and to separate substances. In another way, by the fact that the good of the lower appetite is not regulated according to the higher. For example, when the pleasures of the flesh we will not according to the order of reason, to what the concupiscible tends. But this kind of sin does not occur in separate substances.